So we're gonna go to our next panel now. Then, so we have a panel that is titled "Freire's Perspective in the Brazilian Context," and in this panel, we're gonna have three speakers. So we're gonna start with Adriana Cristina Sambugaro de Mattos Brahim. I have a few words to say about Adriana. I'm going to read her bio, but before I do that, I have to tell you that I owe a lot to Adriana because I remember in 2003, I enrolled in a class. It was a foreign language teaching methodology class. And the first class that I had, the professor was Adriana. And in the first class, the first text that we read was Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So that was when I met Freire in a deeper level, and I owe that to Adriana. Thank you, Adriana. So I'm going to read her bio now. So Adriana Cristina Sabugaro de Matos Brahim is a professor in the Department of Higher and Professional Education and in the graduate program in languages at the Federal University of Paraná in Curitiba, Brazil. She is the head of the research group on language education, GPLIN, DGP CNPq. Her research is focused on literacies and decolonial studies in language education and language teacher education. Her presentation is going to be an ethnographic narrative about the influences of Paulo Freire's pedagogy in the applied linguistics made in Brazil. Following Adriana, we're going to have Georgina Lima. So Georgina is an associate professor in the Department of Education at the Federal University of Pelotas in Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. She is the head of the research group of social movements, public education, and popular education, MOVICE. Georgina is also the coordinator of the Observatory of Interinstitutional and Affirmative Actions of the South region. Her research is focused on education in ethnic racial relations, Quilombola communities, gender, and affirmative action policies. Her presentation is going to be about Freirean practices and humanistic perspectives of anti racism. And we are going to finalize with Inny Accioly. Inny, unfortunately, she won't be here in person because she has health issues at the moment. But we are going to play a video of one of her presentations that she agreed on. So Inny Accioly is a professor of education at the Fluminense Federal University in Brazil. Her research focus on critical pedagogy is a multidisciplinary perspective that relates environmental education, grassroots movements, policy analysis, and international and comparative education. She's the program chair at the Paulo Freire Social Interest Group, the American Education Research Association, AERA. She's editing with Dr. Donald Macedo the upcoming book, Education, Equality, and Justice in the New Normal, Global Responses to a Pandemic. So, yes, I think we can start. So, Adriana, are you ready then?
Yes, of course, I'm ready. Thank you. Um, Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, Elusa. Thank you, Marlon, for the introduction. Also, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this pre-conference of this wonderful event. It is truly an honor for me to participate in this event and having the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the influences of Freire's work in our practices in language education and in applied linguistics and in our social life. Congratulations for organizing this beautiful event. I would say a gift for all of us in this sad pandemic context in which we face lots of problems, challenges, uncertainties, mainly in Brazil, where there is a growth of social inequalities, social injustices, with a government that simply has denied science and the severity of COVID-19 with the loss of more than 460,000 lives. So the heading of my talk, as Marlon has just read, is an autoethnographic narrative about the influences of Paulo Freire's pedagogy in the applied linguistics made in Brazil. So you can notice that Freire has been my source of inspiration, even in the way I have chosen to share some of my thoughts with you today. Therefore, I'm going to talk in an autoethnographic narrative way, just like Freire did in his books. So I'm going to talk a little about my life, about my pedagogical and research practices intertwined in applied linguistics made in Brazil, which is, in my view, influenced by Freire's theories. Thus, I will narrate a little about my personal experiences as a student and then as a language teacher, and as an educator, and as a researcher, with all my identities that have been developed while I have been living or being, in Freire's words, in the different historical, cultural, and social contexts, doing my way while I am walking, being a social subject and being in my own body that sometimes is banned from being due to the economic, political, ideological, social, and historical contingencies. Therefore, I am Adriana Cristina Sambugaro de Mattos Brahim, a white cisgender woman. I was born in a small town in Paraná State in the south of Brazil, and I have lived in Curitiba since 2000. Curitiba is the capital city of Paraná State, and it has a population of about 2 million people. I am a granddaughter from a family of descendants of Italian and Portuguese immigrants. I have a sister and 2 brothers. In spite of having 2 brothers and 1 sister, I used to be a lonely child with no friends because of my father's work. Sometimes we didn't used to live at least a year in the same city. That's why I couldn't have long friendly relations. I studied in public schools my whole childhood, and I have also attended undergraduate and graduate courses in public universities. In 1989, I started attending the undergraduate course in languages and literature in the Faculty of Sciences and Languages in Campo Mourão, a small city of about 80,000 people in Paraná State, also in the south of Brazil. During the attendance of the undergraduate course in languages and literature, I was strongly influenced by the master's degree studies of Professor Edicleia Basso, to whom I pay tribute in my speech. And I would like to say that Professor Edicleia Basso was my supervisor at the end of the undergraduate course, when it was mandatory to teach at least 2 months of classes in public schools. By that time, Professor Edicleia Basso was concluding her master's degree in applied linguistics at the State University of Campinas, and she used to teach us about her studies on new methodologies in foreign language teaching and in applied linguistics in Brazil. In the early 1990s, the applied linguistics studies used to question the traditional methodologies to foreign language teaching, but under language structuralist views. Just after concluding the undergraduate course of languages and literature, I taught English to elementary students for 4 years. Then I started to attend a course in applied linguistics to foreign language teaching at the same faculty in Campo Mourão, coordinated by Professor Edicleia Basso. in 1996. She taught classes about Paulo Freire and his critical pedagogy, and to conclude that course, the participants were invited to prepare activities based on what was called the thematic method, which was pretty much inspired by the selected words in Freire's literacy. I was really motivated in using those activities with my elementary students. That's why I started to use them in my classes. I was anxious to change my pedagogical practices because I felt my students were all bored with my classes. I felt my English teaching practice didn't help them to learn the language and to learn about the world. Actually, my practice was an example of the banking model of education that Paulo Freire criticized. I used it to deposit grammar rules. The exercises I used it to prepare were pretty much based in a textbook. They were mainly exercises about filling the blanks. Those activities, based on what we called the thematic method, didn't help me to have big changes in my pedagogical practice because I was naive and I didn't have a deep understanding of what education is all about. I didn't have an understanding of education as a political act. That is, in Freire's words, I didn't understand that it is as impossible to deny the political nature of the educational process as it is to deny the educational character of the political act. Thus, rereading today that naive practice of preparing activities to teach a foreign language that was supposed to be based on Freire's work is for me an exercise of critical perception, interpretation, and rewriting what was done in Freire's sense. So after a while, I realized how my practices didn't have the necessary understanding of what is implicated when we take into consideration that it's impossible to understand education as neutral. In Freire's words, the neutrality of education, which results in being understood as a pure task to serve in the formation of an ideal type of human being, disembodied from what is real, virtuous, and good, is one of the fundamental connotation of the naive vision of education. From the point of view of such a vision, the world is reborn in the intimacy of consciousness, moved by the by the goodness of the hearts. And since education models souls and recreates hearts, it is the fulcrum of social change. In 1999, Professor Edicleia Basso encouraged me to attend the master's program at the State University of Campinas, and in 2000, I started my master's studies. By that time, I met Professor Joanne Busnardo, who was my dissertation supervisor. She introduced me to the book by Paulo Freire and Donaldo Macedo, Literacy, Reading the Word and the World. By that time, I used it to teach high school students, and my research was about how to teach critical reading in English. I was really motivated to try to have a better idea of what means to be a progressive teacher in foreign language education, and I was really convinced that Paulo Freire's work would help me out. I was pretty much inspired by some questions I used to ask myself, such as, what is critical pedagogy? What is critical literacy? What does it mean to read critically? How can I teach from these perspectives? Is it possible to teach critical reading to English students? And being English a hegemonic language in my country, what does it mean to teach this language? What's it for? Why to teach it? How do I manage this teaching? What are the implications of my decisions on my teaching? Well, lots of questions. And I started to understand and acknowledge my earlier political naivety. The reading of literacy, reading the word and the world, helped me to perceive my political naivety in relation to the choices I used to make in the classroom. The course book I used, the activity I prepared, the way I taught classes, the topics I used to discuss, and the way I choose to discuss them in class. I started to perceive that, in fact, it is impossible to understand education as an autonomous or neutral practice. At the same time, I started to make a link with the interests of the applied linguistics I call Made in Brazil, because of the concepts of language, dialogue, consciousness raising, in critical reading, all of them implicated or pretty much present in Paulo Freire's perspective of literacy. After the master's degree, I started my PhD with the same interest in studying and researching critical reading in foreign language education. Since then, I have been noticing how the applied linguistics Made in Brazil has been concerned about another concept of language, and not that of structuralist tradition, which sees language as a code or system or an instrument of communication. Paulo Freire, in his works, writes about another view of language. For him, language is developed to the degree that it reaches a certain stability in a particular area and to the extent that it's used in the comprehension and expression of the world by the groups that speak it. Thus, language is also culture for Paulo Freire. And also, in his words, language is the mediating force of knowledge, but it is also knowledge itself. Thus, Paulo Freire, in my opinion, understands language as a social practice, since for him, a language can only be developed when it is practiced in all spheres of communicative functions. In other words, he's definitely not talking about language as an abstract system, but as practice, as social practice. And of course, this perspective of language has implications in the way we understand reading, another concept which has been very discussed in applied linguistics in Brazil by scholars such as Menezes de Souza, Montemor, Ferraz, Duboc, Jordão, Martinez, Beato Canato, Signorini, Braga, Kleiman, among others. This perspective of language has many implications, not only for our practices in applied linguistics, but also for education, which implies in our social life. This perspective of language, along with the concept of critical reading in Paulo Freire's work, has implications, for example, in the way we read the Brazilian political and social pandemic context. I will come back to this point soon later. For Paulo Freire, reading does not consist merely of decoding the written word or language. Rather, it is preceded by and intertwined with knowledge of the world. Language and reality are dynamically interconnected. Also, for Paulo Freire, the understanding attained by critical reading of a text implies perceiving the relationship between text and context. In this sense, the act of reading is necessary because reading the world always precedes reading the word. And reading the word implies continually reading the world. According to Paulo Freire, this movement from the word to the world is always present. Even the spoken word flows from our reading of the world. In a way, however, we can go further and say that reading the word is not preceded merely by reading the world, but by a certain form of writing it or rewriting it, that is, of transforming it by means of conscious, practical work. This is Paulo Freire's writings. Thus, these ideas are really in my thoughts in present times, that is, the need of reading critically our context, our world, before reading the word. It implies the importance of reading critically the discourses in our lives with the pandemic. That's why I have been in the movement of rereading Paulo Freire's work since last year. I am pretty much convinced that Paulo Freire's work on critical literacy can help not just language educators, but educators for any education field. Paulo Freire's work can help us to understand the importance of our teaching, of our education, in order to create ways to critically read the social and political reality in Brazil and collectively try to change it. In my exercise of rereading Paulo Freire, along with the exercise of updating some of Paulo Freire's concepts, I have been making more connections with the applied linguistics made in Brazil, which, according to Moita Lopes and many other applied linguists from Brazilian University, is pretty much concerned about the social life in an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and non-disciplinary way. And also,
you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. And apply linguistics that is looking for a border thinking, or ontologies and epistemologies that consider the emergencies and the contingencies of the language education nowadays and language teacher education. For example, in Brazil, there has been a growth of intolerance towards different conservative educational proposals, such as the government bill Escola Sem Partido, or schools without politics. In this pandemic, the political fight for vaccines among politicians, the everyday talks of Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president, who denies science, and the severity of the pandemic, when the population suffered from the lack of hospital, vaccine, respected to life, respected to humanity. After all, in 2021, it seems that Paulo Freire is still updated, and his concepts can be even more updated to our times of pandemic and of a government like the one we have. I'm pretty much convinced that an awareness-raising oriented education in which all of us would find ourselves as subjects to our own history, reading the world and the word could help the development of the empowerment of discourses and practices of resistance, re-existence, and hope for the struggle, because as Paulo Freire wrote, without a minimum of hope, we cannot so much as start the struggle. But without struggle, hope as an ontological need dissipates, loses its bearings, and turns into hopelessness. Hence the need for a kind of education in hope. So let's keep hope. Let's celebrate Paulo Freire, because as he has been teaching us, in a country like Brazil, keeping hope alive is in itself a revolutionary act. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Wonderful. Well done. Thank you so much. And we're going to go to Georgina now. Georgina recorded a video for us and we added the subtitles. So you're going to have the privilege to listen to Portuguese now. and read the subtitles in English. And then at the end, we're going to get back and we're going to, I saw that there are lots of questions in the chat, and we're going to get back with the questions and answers. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing the screen.
Boa tarde. Eu gostaria de agradecer imensamente ao convite feito por Marlon e Elusa para participar deste painel, que é parte das atividades que envolvem a Conferência Internacional de Educação de Adultos, organizada pela Associação Canadense de Educação de Adultos e cujo motivo primordial é a celebração dos 100 anos de Paulo Freire. Cumprimento de igual forma aos colegas Celso Sanches e Inny Accioly pela partilha deste momento comigo. É um prazer imenso estar com vocês, um grande abraço, obstante esta distância e essa virtualidade que nos faz comunicação. Meu nome é Georgina Lima, eu sou ex-professora da Educação Básica, atualmente eu sou professora associada do Departamento de Ensino da Universidade Federal de Pelotas, da Faculdade de Educação. Esta universidade que é localizada no município de Pelotas, um município cuja representatividade da história da composição da sociedade brasileira, no que tange à população negra, no que tange aos processos de escravização negra, mas também a incessante forma de educar o mundo com a sua presença. Somos, apesar de tudo, mais da metade da população brasileira. De antemão, eu me apresento neste momento, não como uma estudiosa de Paulo Freire, mas penso que talvez esse diferencial na forma como se estabelece esse relacionamento de muitas décadas, de muitos olhares, de muitos lugares, seja importante para a construção da minha contribuição neste painel. É uma polissemia de olhares que eu venho trazendo na minha relação com Freire. Pediria licença para anunciar algo que aprendi com o mestre. Impossível qualquer reflexão que se faça sem nos voltarmos para a nossa própria história. E nesse momento, diria que a imersão se fez mais profunda por tratar-se de uma atividade que a educação de jovens e adultos, que a educação de adultos se faz presente. Nesse sentido, ao começar a organizar os pensamentos para essa minha breve exposição, foi inevitável não remeter-me a uma pessoa adulta que, à época que Freire protagonizava modos peculiares de alfabetização, aqui no sul do país, num outro processo de alfabetização, estava indo à escola noturna, aprender as primeiras letras. E foi emblemático para quem ainda não havia ido na escola, eu era muito pequena, foi emblemático no que diz respeito a uma característica que se tornou rotina para ela, escrever. Se tornou rotina para uma mulher negra, empregada doméstica, que passava a escrever muito, de forma muito peculiar. Quando partiu dessa existência física, deixou uma quantidade de pequenos papéis escritos com tudo que escutava, principalmente do rádio, depois da televisão, e também de uma audição muito atenta a tudo que a permeava, a tudo que a rodeava. Eram papéis como... Aqui tem duas mensagens que ela deve ter escutado. Esses pequenos papéis, na maioria das vezes, não eram folhas límpidas, eram pedaços de papéis, enfim, eram papéis cujas escritas revelavam a profundidade do modo como construía a sua vida, a minha vida e a de meus irmãos, durante as múltiplas jornadas de trabalho a que submetia para nos possibilitar o viver, ou por horas para nos possibilitar o sobreviver. Esse momento de preparação para essa atividade me fez, então, buscar uma mala de lembranças, literalmente uma mala de lembranças, que tinham guardados dos meus pais, cujo objetivo primordial era recuperar a fotografia e me demorar nos detalhes dessa fotografia. Não a encontrei, mas encontrei um conjunto de outras tantas coisas que traduzem aquilo que é pressuposto freiriano: aprender com a própria história, sem arredar o pé dessa condição. Falta tempo para poder discorrer os palpites que meu coração tiveram, a maneira como as minhas mãos tremiam, sobre os reencontros contidos naquela mala, sobre as novas racionalidades que me ocorreram e me reafirmam o dado da inconclusão. O dado da inconclusão de mim, o dado da inconclusão da minha vida, o dado da inconclusão da presença dos meus pais, o dado da inconclusão até mesmo da morte. Nos encontramos aqui no Brasil em um momento que se faz imprescindível, todos os dias, evocar a esperança, como possibilidade de resistir a tantas perdas provocadas pela pandemia do coronavírus, que, em verdade, expõe a olho nu um conjunto de ameaças, ou melhor, de ameaçados, que pré-existem a essa crise, que se ela é sanitária, ela também é uma crise civilizatória. Nunca se tornou tão necessário aquilo que fosse intrínseca à nossa natureza humana, à nossa experiência histórica, como diria Freire. Esperançar. Esperançar como verbo a ser conjugado, porque de igual forma são dias ininterruptos de luto, sofrimento e dor. A todo momento nos cabe encontrar mecanismos para reinventar a vida. Essa vida despotencializada pela ausência do abraço, despotencializada também por uma ausência de políticas que ataque a letalidade de um vírus que briga para alojar os nossos corpos e cujo combate escapa à biologia, desafia a ciência biomédica a expandir seus laboratórios e compreender estes efervescentes laboratórios sociais que são as sociedades mundiais, latinas, em especial a brasileira, fraturada historicamente por um conjunto de opressões que jamais calaram as nossas resistências. Por isso, sobreviveremos. Sim, esperançaremos a vida, mas sem deixar de lamentar as mortes, que são para além de números, mas que essa representatividade se aproxima à casa dos quase 460 mil óbitos. Em alusão à morte de Dona Elsa, esposa de Freire, o mesmo afirmou que contra a morte não há truques. É sentir a fundo a dor inevitável ao perceber que alguém se vai, para em seguida, mais cedo ou mais tarde, aprender a manha de seguir a vida. Aprender a manha de seguir a vida não é aprendizado fácil. Creio que cada um de nós vai tecendo uma rede de significados a partir dessas experiências, que são, por vezes, experiências individuais, experiências coletivas, e os efeitos dessas experiências nos obrigam, por vezes, a olhar para trás e reconstruir alguns percursos que não se perdem no tempo, ainda que muitas vezes não os percebamos como força para poder seguir. Falar sobre educação de adultos me fez abrir a mala material de recordação, porque as recordações subjetivas estão guardadas em todos os lugares e tempos, no meu corpo e também na minha alma. Algumas semanas atrás, para falar em Freire, retornei ao final dos anos de 1980, o meu ingresso na universidade pública. Hoje, voltei a um tempo que não vivi, mas que existe em mim, quando encontrei o último boletim escolar, datado em 1938, do senhor Walter, meu pai, um brilhante artesão de pães, um padeiro, que esteve poucos anos na escola. Esteve na escola, talvez, o tempo insuficiente para que não lhe fosse tolhido o orgulho de assinar o seu nome. Que não lhe fosse tolhido o direito de escrever os seus cadernos de receita com uma escrita que colocaria em questão a sua quase ou nenhuma escolaridade, com talento, com calma, com orgulho, que desobedecia à fúria do tempo que o capital incide sobre a vida dos operários, escrevia o seu nome, escrevia os artefatos do seu ofício como um verdadeiro ato de desobediência. Enfim, no final da década de 80, eu ingressei na Faculdade de Educação Física, um curso que, à época, questionava sobremaneira a concepção de movimento humano, que primordialmente advém de um corpo que move-se, age, rememora a luta de sua libertação, conforme diria Freire. O corpo, afinal, deseja, aponta, anuncia, protesta, se curva, se ergue, desenha e refaz o mundo. Nenhum de nós, nem tu, estamos aqui dizendo que a transformação se faz a partir de um corpo individual. Não, porque o corpo se constrói socialmente. A década de 80 era um momento muito efervescente, período de redemocratização política do país, e que nos incitava a reinventar uma educação física que, com todas as heranças eugenistas, tecnicistas, militaristas, na verdadeira acepção de disciplinarização dos corpos, teria que ceder a outras possibilidades que não fossem aliadas àquilo que, na atualidade, tenta se reatualizar aqui na sociedade brasileira por intermédio do lema da bandeira Ordem e Progresso, cujo discurso subliminar acena para o descarte daqueles cuja vida, tal como seus corpos, são residuais. Eram e são muitos os desafios da época passada e dos tempos presentes. Para esses dias de festa, eu retomei o primeiro dos meus poucos livros que eu pude comprar durante meu tempo de universidade. Durante meu tempo de universidade, a minha renda era feita de trabalhos domésticos, que garantiriam a permanência da primeira pessoa da minha família que entrou na universidade. O livro era Pedagogia do Oprimido, uma leitura que me absorveu muitos meses, que me fazia rabiscar com um giz de cera roxo, que com certeza eu não consegui compreender a complexidade que ele trazia, que me fez registrar as datas e impressões nas suas páginas e que me fez muitas vezes ser tomada pelo medo. Sim, o medo pela relação paradoxal entre o tão próximo e tão distante das condições históricas, dialéticas, conflitantes entre opressores e oprimidos. Sim, o medo que a tal da praxis, que terminara de conhecer enquanto palavra, se escrevesse no horizonte do irrealizável. No entanto, como diria Freire, é sempre necessário estabelecer certos limites para o nosso medo. Não preciso fazer discursos públicos sobre o meu medo, mas não preciso racionalizá-lo e não devo negá-lo, dar-lhe um nome e dar a impressão de que não estou com medo. No momento em que você começa a racionalizar seu medo, começa a negar seus sonhos. Frente a isso, tem sido anos de formação acadêmica, juntamente à atuação profissional na educação básica e universidade, com uma convicção de que o rastro da pedagogia do oprimido se torna a pedagogia da praxis, da liberdade, da humanização. Liberdade como condição de humanidade que possibilitaria o reposicionamento dos miseráveis do mundo, dos condenados da terra, como diria Franz Fanon, a lugares de dignidade. Dignidade é esta roubada através dos violentos ataques do colonialismo e da permanência deste através de uma colonialidade tão bem teorizada por Aníbal Quirino. Do meu lugar de classe, gênero e principalmente de raça, A luta antirracista tornou o horizonte possível de transformar as vilas, os quilombos, as ruas, como lugares escola, como potentes para uma atuação que não cinde teoria e prática, que não dissocia pesquisa, ensino e extensão como compromisso político, que me impulsionam a estar na formação e na construção de educação e escolarizações contra-hegemônicas, no que tange a formação de professores e professoras, no local onde a experiência ocorre, na construção de projetos de escola diferenciados para comunidades remanescentes de quilombo, na produção de materiais didáticos cuja matéria-prima é um cotidiano negro reafricanizado nas diásporas, na construção de implementação de políticas públicas que, em síntese, se constituem projetos de sociedade não para a população negra, mas para a população em geral, porque implica na libertação radical de todos e todas envolvidos e envolvidas na relação antagônica entre quem oprime e quem é oprimido e oprimida. Por isso, no bojo da luta de uma sociedade mais justa, os determinantes de classe tornam-se insuficientes para compreender que, talvez, os níveis de opressão se diferenciem pela tenacidade com que os corpos são classificados pela violenta métrica da cor, do sexo, da idade, enfim, por essa intersecção de diferenças que produzem classificações sociais. Mais tarde, me encontro mais profundamente com Franz Fanon, que é tão presente em pedagogia do oprimido, que se anunciara na educação como prática de liberdade e que torna a minha aproximação com Paulo Freire de um modo mais profundo, porque me permite que eu desvele o mito da democracia racial brasileira, ausente na lista dos mitos que o próprio Paulo traz na pedagogia do oprimido. Mitos estes que, conforme ele afirma, são depositados cotidianamente, através de pequenos e grandes comunicados ideológicos, que em massa permitem uma verdadeira comunicação que rechace esses mitos, condição indispensável à mudança do status quo. Este mundo mitificado da década de 1960 persiste em 2021. Por ironia, nós temos um presidente da República chamado por alguns como mito. Este reedita discursos e práticas que fomentam o racismo, que em todas as suas versões são cruéis pedagogia do ódio. Uma pedagogia do ódio, portanto, que na perspectiva de Freire também jamais será totalitária. São várias as pedagogias insurgentes. Ele nos mostrou isso: pedagogia do oprimido, pedagogia da esperança, pedagogia da indignação, pedagogia da autonomia. São pedagogias que se fundem e que subvertem. Penso também em pedagogias quilombolas, uma das pedagogias que eu tenho me debruçado a entender e ajudar a construir, que não reconhece os lugares de viver como terra, mas como um território cultural, cuja educação que sustenta esse território, secularmente, fragiliza a lógica binária entre os conhecimentos da escola e os conhecimentos da vida. Assim sendo, a educação dos jovens, das crianças, sempre é a educação com os velhos. Os velhos que, se não vão à escola, se não foram à escola como estudantes, estão permanentemente nessa escola, como história, como memória e principalmente como troncos velhos para epistemologias que não cessam de insurgir. Em alguns contextos, junto aos conselhos escolares, como na escola Diogo Ramos, na comunidade quilombola de João Surá, existe conselho dos anciões, ou seja, é uma ancestralidade aprendiz, é uma ancestralidade guerreira, é uma ancestralidade de luta. Na cronologia das obras de Freire, mesmo após as suas experiências em contato com o racismo norte-americano e as vivências no continente africano, o combate ao racismo em todas as suas dimensões, estrutural, institucional, epistêmica e fenotípica, está anunciado nas entrelinhas de uma proposta que, se traz o binômio da liberdade como condição de humanidade, liberdade e humanidade, implica dizer que os extremos das desumanizações são as coisificações de gente. Nesse sentido, não há educação que liberte e nem chance de rehumanizar o mundo se este não for um mundo desracializado. Para tanto, remeto-me a Fanon. O negro não deve mais ser colocado dentro desse dilema, branquear ou desaparecer. Os processos educativos têm que dar em conta da diminuição dessa ambiguidade. Este dilema tem estado ainda presente nos processos educacionais, impostos desde a educação das crianças até a educação dos adultos. Tem-se no Brasil uma violência em curso, em grande medida sustentada por um Estado necropolítico que transforma sistema de segurança pública em morte autorizada. São jovens negros, na faixa de 19 a 29 anos, que interrompem as suas vidas pelas balas certeiras, ao invés de balas perdidas, de um Estado policial cuja feição do crime e da morte tem predominantemente a cor como um defeito. Um Estado que tem permitido que infâncias sejam igualmente interrompidas, porque não são as mortes que diminuem, mas sim as idades de morrer. Nunca morreram tantas crianças nesse país. Na terceira carta presente na Pedagogia da Indignação, Freire dizia, frente ao assassinato do indígena Pataxó, que coisa estranha brincar de matar índio, brincar de matar gente. E eu acrescentaria, que coisa estranha naturalizar as mortes dessas gentes negras que andarilharam no mundo, ainda que forçados pelo tráfico negreiro, e que tem uma lógica de que, sendo eles por eles mesmos, têm transposto situações limites e têm criado permanentemente inúmeros inéditos viáveis. A zona de não ser a que o colonialismo lançou milhares de vidas humanas dentro e fora dos seus territórios é, contraditoriamente, um lugar de anunciação. Muitas vezes, perceptível apenas aos olhos de quem, como Paulo Freire, ao pisar pela primeira vez o chão africano, sentiu-se como quem voltava e não como quem chegava. Assim se sentiu Freire. Em todo o seu exílio, ele sentia muita necessidade de não se desenraizar como brasileiro, nordestino, recifense, enfim, não prescindia das marcas que o seu lugar lhe deu. A sua andarilhagem teria que jamais ser um vagar sem destino. Essa sensação de estar em casa, pela semelhança, pela diferença, que dialoga, obstante as genocidas travessias oceânicas, o Brasil é a África, me fazem crer ser vital tratar com mais atenção os processos de construção e fortalecimento identitário, principalmente da população negra, no sentido de que a história e cultura africana e brasileira não seja motivo de negação, de colocar-se numa zona de não ser. Muitas das vezes, trabalhar com os elementos da cultura negra são subjugados pela falaciosa narrativa de uma igualdade que retarda o sentido da amorosidade, porque, ideologicamente, é abrigo de fecundas violências. Paulo Regulus Alves Freire, em 1995, aos 74 anos, no livro Sentado sobre a Mangueira, afirmava se sentir moço, recusando a velhice, não por vaidade. Aos 100 anos, como Paulo Freire se sentiria? Talvez um jovem velho. Os critérios, ao seu ver, para se sentir novo ou velho, não poderiam ser os do calendário, porque, como diria Freire, somos velhos ou moços muito mais em função de como pensamos o mundo, da disponibilidade com que nos damos curiosos ao saber, cuja procura jamais nos causa e cujo achado jamais nos deixa imovelmente satisfeitos. Como nos manter jovens se discriminarmos negros, mulheres, homossexuais, trabalhadores e trabalhadoras? A preservação da juventude é um processo exigente, Não tolera incoerências. Não é possível ser-se ao mesmo tempo jovem racista, jovem machista, jovem explorador. É festa de Freire, mas não poderia deixar de trazer muitas gentes esquecidas para esta festa. Não poderia deixar de trazer os meus pais, que daqui a pouco também se secularizariam. Certa vez, é uma expressão recorrente de quem vive atento às coisas da vida. Paulo usava algumas vezes ao início de cada rememorar. Meu pai, o artesão de pães e das letras desenhadas, também sempre introduzia suas narrativas com a expressão. Em uma ocasião dessas, minha mãe, que não esteve nos círculos de cultura, mas se alfabetizou, me permite que eu use essas expressões. Certa vez, uma ocasião destas, uma mulher tardiamente construiu outras formas de contar história, deixando inúmeros papeizinhos dispersos que contam a história não sobre a forma de palavras, não sobre a forma de palavras apenas, mas para muito além. Conta histórias de uma mulher negra, empregada doméstica, que gestou a filha que, jovem, ao comprar seu primeiro livro, com a mesma forma de trabalho, termina esta fala na certeza de que o legado freiriano não está mais no encontrar nas suas obras, no encontrar-se com as suas obras escritas, mas está em todos os lugares, principalmente nos movimentos sociais, nos movimentos de todas as pessoas. Está na possibilidade de até mesmo questionar muitas das ausências nas suas escritas, que poderiam ser não ausências suas, porque ele nunca se propôs ser universal. Eis o que Paulo Freire nos deixa como principal elemento de nossa educação, de nossa autoeducação. É nós termos a responsabilidade coletiva e individual frente ao mundo. Por isso, nossas condições de sujeitos e sujeitas das nossas próprias emancipações e reivindicações devem de requerer urgentemente práticas radicais. Aqui eu exijo, eu demando uma prática radical contra o racismo de hoje e que esse racismo não seja para sempre. Obrigada.
Thank you so much, Georgina. Muito obrigado. Linda apresentação. Beautiful words, powerful words. Thank you very much. And we're going to get back to you with a few questions at the end. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go to Inny's presentation. So this presentation was given a few weeks ago by Inny during our graduate symposium of education. It's a symposium that graduate students have at Concordia University, and Inny was one of the participants of the panel that we did to also celebrate Freire at that occasion. So I'm going to play her participation there. So in this screen, you can also see Walter Cohen, who also participated in this panel.
Wow, I'm deeply touched. Wow, I'm so honored to have this opportunity to meet you all, Elusa, Walter, Marlon. Wow, and many congratulations for the organizers of this graduate symposium. It's a very important initiative of creating spaces of knowledge production, of sharing experiences. And also it's an important space to reaffirm the importance of Freire legacy. This kind of democratic spaces in which we can dialogue, spaces that reaffirm the importance of education and science. More than ever, we need these spaces to face the fascist, the ultra-conservative, the anti-scientific waves that are gaining power all over the world with racist and xenophobic discourses, hate speeches. So I see this space here as a space for creating hope, constructing utopia, what Freire called the untested feasibility. And what is most important, it's a space for creating solidarity among educators, solidarity and support, because critical thinking is under attack. It means that there is an articulated attempt to impose the dictatorship of the homogeneous thinking that creates common enemies. For example, the idea that refugees and asylum seekers represent threats to the United States and the European Union citizens, while these people seek asylum precisely because their lives are threatened by the US and European Union policies that finance wars, coup d'etat, policies that finance the misery of entire populations in Africa, in Latin America, and in the peripheries of the global South. Almost 80,000 million people across the globe are forcibly displaced. And once they arrive in the US or in Greece, for example, they are deemed into substandard housing, detention centers, refugee camps, tent cities, places that in general lack safety conditions such as sanitation and sewer systems, places with no medical care. And these poor conditions turn these places as very dangerous places where the possibility of the spread of the coronavirus is very high. The coronavirus pandemic has been used as justification for the government to through on asylum laws. For example, Trump administration used the threat of the coronavirus pandemic to legally expel refugee and asylum seekers or stop them at the border. This tactic of creating an external enemy fuels a permanently militarized society, and dividing people is a successful strategy to reproduce oppression. So it is an intentionally widespread the feeling that the problem is not the elites and the transnational corporation that profits from humans' misery. It is intentionally designed and spread in social media, the feeling of hatred against our neighbors, against the minority, against those who are somehow different from us. But we are all humans, and all humans must have their rights respected and assured. Paulo Freire hasn't experienced the era of the social media, but in his works, he developed tools to critically analyze the media and identify the often hidden mechanisms of domination. That's why Freire's legacy is under attack in Brazil. In Brazil, the fascist, the ultra-neoliberal conservative right is in power. It is an expression of the alliances between the neoliberal right and the authoritarian radical right. Some of them criticizes human rights policies, expression aversion to social movements. Some prosecute teachers for allegedly indoctrinating students with gender ideology or cultural Marxism. Some of them put forward the defense of military dictatorship and the justification of torture. And for all of them, Paulo Freire is the responsible for moral degradation. The coronavirus crisis unveils the obscene degree of inequality, intolerance, racism, the obscene degree of exploitation of workers, and also the coronavirus pandemic unveils the contempt that the rulers have for people's lives. The Brazilian president is working in favor of the virus. He makes public speeches against the use of protective masks, for example. He threatens governors and mayors who enact lockdown. More than 270,000 people have died from coronavirus in Brazil. It's a real genocide. And last week, the Brazilian president said, using these words, "Stop all this fussing and whining. How long are you going to keep on crying?" This is sadistic. This is the highest level of dehumanization that a human being can achieve. Why do Brazilian people accept this? During this genocide, the government approval rate is around 40%. The approval rate amongst the group of the unemployed and people without stable income is around 36%. These are the ones who are forced to take crowded public transportation, trying to find ways for surviving. The ones that depend on overcrowded public hospitals. In my view, Freire's concept of banking education is very important to analyze this situation, because this is the tragic result of a massive system of banking education. Banking education is the concept that Freire used to describe the type of education that ultimately kills life. This is a kind of education that transforms subjects into passive objects. A kind of education that deposits static content on students. An education that kills curiosity, kills the love for the act of knowing. It reaffirms competition. It reproduces inequality, oppression. It kills the ability to dream and act to transform this unjust society. The expansion of the massive banking education system increased the school enrollment rates, but banking education also made it possible to increase the exploitation of workers. So I am trying to analyze, to understand why did this fascist government come to power in Brazil? Why is this president still in power? In my view, it's not possible to ignore the nefarious path that the banking education system has taken towards the barbarism. In Brazil, the banking education system led to a situation in which there is an educated generation that ignores the Brazilian history. In my view, this can partly explain why some groups claim for the return of the military dictatorship, which in Brazil went from 1964 to 1985. There is also an educated generation that ignores the basic fundamentals of science. That's why many people reply anti-scientific discourses during this tragic pandemic. It is an attempt against their own lives. And there is an educated generation that cannot critically analyze the news, the difference between facts and opinions. This is a perfect scenario for fake news. So banking education transforms the right to education into the right of having a certification, a degree. What does it mean to consider education as a right? I understand that the right to education is related to all human rights. Banking education restricts the right to education merely to receiving degrees, certifications. It has serious impacts on the assurance of human rights of all humans. Also, banking education causes serious impacts on nature. This education defines how we learn to relate to the environment and to the other living beings. Banking education plays an important role in the dehumanizing process driven by the neoliberal capitalism. The act of knowing with the purpose of humanization, of being more, in Freire's words, presupposes a dialogical situation. The real dialogue is not the exchange of words. It involves gestures and affections that are collectively constructed and cannot be restricted to teacher-student relationship. And precisely for this reason, I understand that a teaching learning process that takes place remotely or online without the presence that enables these rich and complex human interactions. This kind of education, the online education, cannot be dialogical. It can be a critical education, but not a truly dialogical education. Because while it breaks the temporal and the spatial dimensions that connect people, it reinforces individualism. It has grave and serious consequences for democracy. For example, when teachers get together face to face, they can openly talk about their working conditions, their wages, the exploitation of teachers' work. They can organize themselves into unions. When students get together face to face, they can mobilize in defense of democracy, of public and quality education. We cannot forget that one of the military dictatorship strategies in Brazil was to prohibit people from gathering groups. Also, online learning restricts education to content delivery. It is an online banking education. How many school and university students are unable to access real-time discussions with their teachers and their colleagues? There are internet connections problems. Many students lack technological equipment. Many families face unemployment. Many students and teachers are suffering from mental illness. These are some problems that teachers and students are facing worldwide. How many students are condemned to stay behind and give up studying? In Brazil, our best universities are the public universities, and they are completely free. Over the past 10 years, the access of low-income students to federal university has increased so that more than 50% of the federal university students are the first in their family to attend an university. The Brazilian federal constitution states that the public universities are based on teaching, research, and extension. Extension involves activities in which academic knowledge interacts with community knowledge. This is important for the university to carry out its social function of facing the social problems in favor of the public good, not the private interests. And Freire was an important defender of the public and free university, of the public good, of democracy at universities and schools. He was a defender of the importance of the grassroots movement. Also, he acted to strengthen the national student movement, the National Student Union. In Pedagogy of Freedom, Freire affirmed that the kind of education that does not recognize the right to express appropriate anger against injustice, against disloyalty, against the negation of love, against exploitation, against the violence, fails to see the educational role implicit in the expression of these feelings. It's time to express appropriate anger, to recognize how important it is for democracy. We must teach and learn how to transform the appropriate anger into revolutionary consciousness so that we can find alternative ways against the current exacerbated individualism that is taught at neoliberal schools and universities. This is only possible by democratizing access to public and free basic and higher education for the popular classes, the minorities, the marginalized. I understand that the grassroots movements, the peasant and the indigenous movements, the feminist movements, the Black movements, the unions, the movements for environmental justice, they must have active and permanent presence in schools and universities in such a way that teachers and students can join them and learn about self-organization, tolerance, respect for divergent thinking, learn strategies of struggle and claim. I've been defending that these dark times we are facing imposes the necessity to revolutionize education by constructing what I am calling a curriculum for survival and resistance, to face the historical threats to lives and dignity of the Black and Mestizo people, the indigenous communities, the communities in the global ghettos, to fight against the police brutality, the forced displacement of entire communities, the land grabbing, the violence against women and LGBT people, to fight against the transnational corporation of mining, agribusiness that devastated the Latin American and the African countries. It's time to construct a life-centered education with a curriculum radically focused on the people's fight to rights and against all forms of oppression. This is our challenge as critical educators committed with the fight for a more human, just, and solidary world. So, once again, thank you for this opportunity to be here to celebrate Freire's centenary. Paulo Freire presente. Freire is alive. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that was amazing. Yeah, very powerful as well. Great speech, and that's perfect. So, Audrey, so you've been monitoring the chat. So, do you want to ask Adriana, Georgina a few questions? Yes, you can go ahead.
Actually, we had a question previously for Adriana, but she did answer it through the chat. It was about why is English teaching in school while the neighbors of Brazil are speaking Spanish, and it was answered. I don't know, Adriana, if you want to comment on it, you can do it. If not, we're taking other question. So you can write it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask it orally. Alors, Adriana, if you wanted to add on this question.
I'm not sure if I have answered the questions there. Maybe Marta and Chris would tell us if it's okay for them if I have answered the questions. But for me, you know, the role of English, the teaching of English in Brazil is about that. It's all about that. We live in a coloniality of knowledge, of power, and this is the hegemonic language that we teach. And I say we because I am an educator of foreign language in Brazil, and English is the language. We don't have political strategies, you know, to have, for example, Spanish in our curriculum. And it's really a lack for all of us. Is that okay, Marta?
Sim, na verdade, eu vou falar em português e depois eu falo em francês. Meu inglês não é muito bom. Mas respondeu, sim, vous avez bien répondu à la question. It's correct, it's okay. Na verdade, o espanhol, como uma língua junto com o português na América Latina, formaria um povo mais unido. Eu não sei falar tudo isso em inglês, você pode falar aí. Mas a união do povo latino-americano passa, a meu ver, pela língua. E aquela divisa é dividir para melhor reinar. Aí que está.
Yes. Yeah. She said the idea is to divide. That's why maybe we don't have Spanish, for example, in our schools in Brazil. Okay, because if we speak Spanish, maybe we could be a more united, not country, because, you know, all the countries together in South America, you mean, yes, Marta? Is that right? That I think that it's what you meant.
Thank you. Thank you. There is in the chat, Sandra Gonzalez Adamski want to ask a question, so you can ask it orally if you want.
I was listening to Georgina Lima, the video that she sent. I was trying to read it really quick, and she used a word, and I tried to write it down. Maybe you guys know what it means. It was Quilom, and I didn't get the ending. I don't know if it's a person or a thing or a section of Brazil or something. Does that ring a bell to anyone?
Sandra, can you spell the word, the beginning? Oh, quilombola. Okay, good. Brenda explained.
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah. Georgina, você quer explicar o que é quilombola e a gente depois faz resumo? I'm going to ask Georgina to explain that. She's going to be explaining in Portuguese, and then what we can do, we can summarize what she will be answering.
Thank you.
Comunidades quilombolas são comunidades negras, urbanas e rurais, não apenas comunidades que remetem às comunidades que resistiram ao período da escravidão, mas comunidades negras que foram se reorganizando mesmo no pós-abolição e que possuem muitas características, por exemplo, a terra de uso comum e modos próprios de poder engendrar a vida. E como engendram modos próprios de viver também, têm reivindicado formas próprias de se educar. A exemplo disso, nós temos a educação escolar quilombola, que é uma modalidade de ensino na educação brasileira. Então, são comunidades negras, rurais e urbanas, que resistem a todo esse sistema de opressão reatualizado e que traz o signo da raça como elemento primordial para poder criar desvantagens de todas as ordens. Atualmente, a luta territorial das comunidades quilombolas ela é bastante grande, tão grande quanto a das comunidades indígenas.
Obrigado, Georgina. So what Georgina explained, and I will try to summarize. Elusa is also know a lot. So if I missed something, Elusa help me with the idea. So the quilombolas, there are Black communities which can be urban or rural in Brazil, and these communities are communities of resistance, communities that they have their own way of life. The land is common, so it's a common land, and they have also their own way of educating themselves. So they have what they call quilombola education, which is the proper way of educating in the community as well. Have I missed something? Georgina, quer acrescentar alguma coisa?
I just want to add something. It's when the people from Africa, when the Portuguese pick up people from Africa and sent to Brazil, it was the way of resistance. They didn't accept the situation of slave, and they go to another place, and they building like a real city. In fact, the most important one is Quilombo dos Palmares. Then you say that is really important. They are bigger than Portugal 3 times. So they are 3 times Portugal. So it's a way of resistance, and they never accepted the situation of slave. And now they have the way of teaching to preserve their ancestry.
What language do they speak?
They speak Portuguese.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Georgina, quer acrescentar alguma coisa?
Não. Eu queria agradecer, Marlon. Eu quero me desculpar, não, mas pelo desconforto que seria falar uma outra língua. E eu acho que o painel foi extremamente importante. E é isso. Eu acho que viva Freire, viva nós. Graças. Grata, Marlon.
A gente que agradece muito a sua participação, Georgina. Foi muito, nós somos muito honrados de tê-la conosco. So Georgina was just thanking us for having this panel to celebrate Freire, and I said that actually we are honored with her presence here, and thank you so much. Thank you very much. I think we have a few more minutes for questions. Audrey, do we have any other question?
I don't see question in the chat. Maybe people want to ask question orally. If yes, you can raise your hand.
I can see that Jim, he added a link from Wikipedia on Quilombola as well, if someone is interested as well. Adriana, would you like to
say? Yeah. And now I'd like to talk in my own language. Okay. Bom, eu queria agradecer muito, Marlon. Eu estou muito emocionada de estar aqui. Não vou nem falar muito, porque eu vou começar a chorar. De ver você, ver o teu sucesso, né, como estudante de doutorado. Então, para mim, assim, é muita honra mesmo estar aqui, muita honra esse convite. Eu não me considero uma especialista em Paulo Freire, mas eu sou uma leitora e uma estudiosa. E tenho muito a aprender ainda, então é uma honra poder ouvir a Georgina, que pesquisadora, fantástica, que educadora, meu Deus, quanto aprender com você. A Inny, que infelizmente não pôde estar aqui conosco. E então, é assim, muita emoção, e let's celebrate Freire, because he is really, really important for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana. Muito obrigado. It's you have touched me, with your words. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you, and we hope that Inny, gets better soon as well. That we can celebrate with Inny again. Anybody else have anything to say? And then we can carry on to our celebration. Okay,
One more quick.
perfect.
Had a,
Yeah, Karen, yeah.
I have a question. This is Karen Nagro, University of Winnipeg. Thank you. These are highly inspiring presentations. Thank you so much. My question is, going back to earlier speakers, could you speak more to the specific curricula in various areas that could include learning strategies, texts? How do we foster a greater curriculum of hope and of life that is also encouraging critical thinking and a distinction between fact and opinion? How do we, in the twilight of the democracies, how do we foster a curriculum of hope and enlightenment, quote unquote?
Ok, eu vou falar em português a pergunta da Karen. Karen, I'm just going to summarize your question in Portuguese very quickly.
Yeah.
A Karen, ela perguntou se como que nós poderemos criar, desenvolver esse currículo que a gente tanto fala, esse currículo da esperança. Como que a gente consegue colocar isso em prática em todos os aspectos possíveis? Adriana, if you would like to start.
Yeah. May I, Georgina? Can I start? Maybe I could, right? Okay. Well, Karin, thank you very much for your question. In fact, it's a really good question. But based on what Freire teaches us, I think that we have to look at our contexts at first, curriculum, practices of hope. It needs to be constructed collectively and from our contexts. We don't have recipes. We have to try to develop strategies, methodologies, ideas, but together. Okay, it's difficult to answer this question because we have to work together and try to see what are our needs in the context where we work in. Okay, this is how I would answer, Elusa and Marlon, this question.
Ok. Georgina, você quer falar alguma coisa sobre a pergunta?
Sim, deixa eu ver. Eu penso que nós temos tentado, e o movimento negro, o movimento social negro, o movimento dos negros brasileiros, latino-americanos, eles têm forçado as portas da escola, eles têm forçado esses currículos e têm entrado no sistema legal, sob o ponto de vista da lei que obriga o ensino da história e cultura africana e afro-brasileira, a lei que obriga a história e cultura indígena, a educação, as diretrizes da educação escolar quilombola e as próprias ações afirmativas. Mas, embora seja muito difícil vencer essa barreira curricular, o importante é que existe um currículo vivo em todos os lugares onde nós estamos. E é aí que eu acho que reside a esperança. Nós temos produzido conhecimento e nós temos fortalecido as nossas formas de estarmos no mundo. Se adentramos esses espaços tão difíceis, sim, temos adentrado. Se lá nós encontramos inúmeras resistências, sim. Eu acho que o importante disso, Marlon, é que nós temos tentado, nós temos entrado nas estruturas legais, nas estruturas institucionais, mas eu acho que o mais importante, eu acho que tem sido a nossa sobrevivência enquanto não apenas dono de um conhecimento, mas como socializadores deste conhecimento que não pertence apenas a nós, mas que pertence à humanidade também.
Perfect. Obrigado, Georgina. So I'm going to try to summarize, and if I missed anything, you can help me.
No problem.
So Georgina said we have tried, the Black movement has forced their entry in schools, has forced their entry into the curriculum to create policies that include Black and Indigenous knowledge. By doing so, it has encountered a lot of resistance, a lot of counter arguments against that. However, Georgina says that what is important is to have a live curriculum where hope stands. So a live curriculum that can be sustained by hope. But above all, she says that she thinks that the most important thing is their own survival, our own survival. So we are surviving, we are resisting, and that is this struggle, is important to reach this. Faz sentido, Georgina?
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Karin, for the beautiful question. That's amazing. I think we're gonna have to stop here because we have a portion now that we're gonna have and How Much to Freire by Elusa Gomes and Buddy Hall as well. So Sandra is asking if anyone can recommend a book from Freire, and then we can finish with this with a recommendation. Does anybody would like to recommend? Yes, Adriana?
Yeah. Well, I think that everybody must read Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This is, for me, this is the Bible of Paulo Freire's work, thoughts. For me, this is the main book, but of course, there are many books by Freire. But I would start with that.
Georgina, você também recomendaria Pedagogia do Oprimido?
Yes, sim, recomendaria.
Perfect. That's amazing. Well done. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for this amazing conversation. I think we should get together again in the near future. To celebrate Freire and to discuss and talk and have more time to do that. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.